welcome back to a brand new video. And in today's video, if you couldn't tell from my voice, we're doing something a little bit different. We're not going to be whispering today's video, we're going to be doing it a bit more soft-spoken, just because all the comments last time made me think maybe we should try something a little bit different. So if you guys go on to enjoy today's video, I really appreciate it. Like, this took hours to make, and it was a lot of fun to do, a lot of reading. I can say I haven't read up on Kill Law in a long time. It was really fun to get through all of it. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this. Let me know who your favourite lore was from all this, and I'll do the survivors soon. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoy today's video. The Blight. To understand the human condition, one must rise above it. This was the credo of Talbot Grimes, a Scottish chemist whose unrestrained ambition took him to towering heights. As a boy, he was a popular child, bright, charismatic, and unafraid to challenge authority. Yet, despite his social graces, he was fiercely independent, spending much of his own time exploring the sprawling fields near his town alone. What began as a child's curiosity nearly turned deadly after experimenting with a patch of poisonous foxglove. For days he laid in bed, dripping with sweat, purging any food that touched his stomach. When he recovered, it wasn't fear that gripped him, but fascination. There was something magical in how a single flower could drastically affect him. Into his adult years, his ambition developed as quickly as his questionable methods. He attended the London School of Medicine and excelled despite several reprimands. His willingness to push the limits secured him a position with the British East India Company, and within 7 years he was made head chemist. In time, he completed one of his greatest achievements, a chemical that would increase a worker's productivity while reducing their need for rest. He was rewarded with a secret laboratory beneath a prison camp on Dyer Island. There, off the coast of India, prisoners from the Opium War became unwilling subjects, leading to a drug that allowed soldiers to withstand incredible amounts of pain. Though most side effects were minor, there were rumours that a small number of soldiers went mad. In feral states, they massacred villagers, impaling the populace on bayonets, leaving them hanging in trees. There were no official reports on the subject, and Talbot refused to blame himself for what could only be exaggerated war stories. Though his callous brilliance seemed unflappable, he was ignorant to the enemies his questionable work had amassed. The realization struck him quite quickly, with a steel pipe to the back of the head during a trip to Mangalore. He was bound and loaded into a wagon. When his blindfold was removed, a sickly man showed him a mass grave filled with hundreds of bodies. Unbeknownst to Talbot, his productivity increase in drug had nearly killed an entire factory's worth of workers. He knew he couldn't defend himself against the anger and accusations of his abductor. All he could do was curl up as the blows from the steel pipe rained down. His body was thrown into the grave and left for dead. Shifting between consciousness and the darkest black, he crawled up for an escape, his fingers sinking into rotten flesh. Black flies feasted on uncovered skin, the sensation of 100 pinpricks stabbing into him. As he collapsed, he came face to face with a dead woman's dazzling hazel eyes. Too weak to pull away, he could do nothing but witness his life's work. Then, from the edge of death, he was brought back. He found himself on a small bed of kindly wrinkled face looked over him. With each pained breath, he was nursed back to health in an ancient mystery school, posing as a monastery. In verdant gardens behind tall, unassuming walls, monks studied forbidden texts, striving to expand the human mind in the search of other dimensions, believing one to be connected to the other. Talbot's knowledge proved indispensable, his mind-altering chemicals integrating seamlessly with theories of neural expansion. He realized that then his salvation was no coincidence. He was plucked from the pits specifically to advance the school's knowledge. He agreed to help until his recovery was complete, being tasked with researching what the monks called the soul chemical, a compound derived from the pineal gland that could open the mind's eye. What began as a favour to his saviours soon became an obsession. Poring over the school's archives of lost texts, he uncovered scientific formulas that confirmed previously unthinkable ideas. He dreamt of ushering humankind into a new period of enlightenment. Perhaps then the nightmares of hundreds of dead factory workers and those two hazel eyes would fade from his mind. As he came closer to a breakthrough, the demeanour of the monk shifted. The gentle smiles they offered were paired with uneasy eyes that quickly darted away when spotted. The polite conversations he once privy to turned to hushed murmurs. The last thing he would see of the school was the cracked ceiling above his bed, branching like a dendrite through plaster. His next memories were of shattered mosaic of images and sensations, smearing lights, horse hoofs on cobblestone, coarse burlap scratchings at his cheeks, and sharp bites into his arms. He awoke ragged and unwashed, splayed on the straw mattress of an opium den. Mind in a dense fog, his first thought was of his notes, the only record of his groundbreaking revelations. He searched frantically, scrambling through the dingy basement, pleading aloud for help. The few other denizens looked up from their hammocks, offering nothing but drug-soaked eyes and apathetic gazes that soon fell to a half-slumber. Before he noticed the robed figure appear behind him, a needle plunged into his arm and the world would disappear once more. Awoken again, each time hazier than the last, he tongued at hollow gaps between his teeth. How long, he wondered, a faint memory returned, the soul chemical, his notes, the verge of a breakthrough. A faraway whisper entered his mind. He fumbled with a stone, sharpening it with shaking hands. In the dim light of the den, amongst the catatonic occupants, he carved his research from memory into the walls. He wrote for hours until his fingers bled, moving to the floor, taking in everything the voice whispered, despite his inability to comprehend it. When there was nothing left to write, he gripped the stone and carved the message into his chest. Stained with blood, he witnessed a miracle appear before him. A magnificent field of lush orange flowers. The whispered voice beckoned to him, urging him to enter the field and discover worlds and dimensions beyond human comprehension. For a moment, Talbot felt the sense of wonder he possessed as a child. The denizens of the opium den awoke to silence. The dry scent of smoke still lingered in the air. Shambling out of their drug-fueled haze fog, they found the stone wet with blood. Tiny rivets coursing through the cracks. As eyes adjusted to the darkened room, the jagged lettering scrawled along its length began to appear, written over and over without end. There was but one single line: "Death is only the beginning." Twins. A pair of conjoined twins, Charlotte and Victor Deshays, formed an emotional bond like no other. The unlikeliness of their successful birth in the 17th century could be described as miraculous, yet it immediately brought about their life of persecution. The twins emerged with Victor's lower body affixed into the chest of his sister, legs twisted around her muscles and organs. He was smaller than Charlotte, grown as if he was an appendage of her body, rather than a fully formed boy. As the newborns screeched, so did the midwife who delivered them, running from the home, yelling of a demon birthed by a witch, to the hunting of Charlotte, Victor, and their mother Madeline. The coming years were fleeting memories for the twins, yet they were the closest thing to a normal life they would know. The journey with their mother was what they believed all children underwent. The games of running and hiding through France's countryside began an ordinary occurrence. At the age of 5, a new challenge to the game was presented as their mother fell ill. Pale and exhausted, Madeline had no choice but to pass responsibility of collecting food onto Charlotte. The girl, burdened with extra clothing that concealed Victor's protruding body, set out from their forest tent and marched to the nearby town. Though a peculiar sight, she did what she was trained for, waiting for an opening at the market, swiping whatever food she could. It was a victory in the game, but it was one short-lived. After midnight, glowing flames surrounded the family's encampment, bobbing through the darkness. A single commanding shout broke the night silence, and a mob of witch hunters streamed in. Grubby hands tore the twins from their bed, Charlotte frantically kicking all that approached. Madeline cried for her children, her voice abruptly silenced by a club to the skull. Victor shrieked, the wailing of a trapped rat. The hunters coordinated quickly. A judge on hand declared Madeline guilty of witchcraft, evidenced by her demon spawn. Within minutes, they shackled her unconscious body to a tree, surrounding her feet with dry twigs and moss. As she awoke, she did not struggle, only begged her children to turn away. They would not be given a choice. The twins were forced to watch as the torch was lit, and they watched as flames leapt up the mother's skirt, charring and sizzling her flesh. They watched as fat dripped from her body, and face bubbled and twisted. This is just me interjecting. I really apologise for how graphic this is. I never read Twins' lore, and this is really something to read. This is kind of hard to read with a straight face. They watched until the screams that tore her vocal cords were no more, and all that was left was the crackling embers and nauseating stench. Whatever joy and goodness were in them died with their mother. Caged and transported to an old wooden temple, they were sold to a secretive group, clad in dark cloaks. Victor reacted with the ferocity of a rabid beast at anyone who approached, clawing and biting. The only solace that would calm him was the embrace of his sister. Charlotte, bitter and hateful to all but her brother, found purpose in being his protector. In the temple, they were exposed to unusual experiments, some cruel, many simply baffling. One day they would be made to break the neck of a small grey bird. The next they would bleed their fingers into a vase of roses. Every seventh day they would sleep with the branch of a damp oak beneath their pillow. Then there was the chanting, a never-ending chorus from cloaked figures on scheduled intervals. In time, a final experiment was planned. Two robed figures herded the twins to the centre of the temple, holding Charlotte above an altar in the room, lit with candelabras. The wrinkled face of a man peered from under the hood, placing a hand on the forehead of each twin, making careful examination of their skulls. Memento mori, he uttered as he withdrew a shining blade. Charlotte rolled to the side, shifting her brother off the altar. With a screech, he stretched his arm as far as he could, knocking a candelabra to the ground. The flames took to the dry wood immediately. They swept over the floor, igniting the black robes that brushed against it. Screams of agony pierced the chaos, invigorating Charlotte. She dashed through the inferno, vision concealed with nothing but black smoke and blazing flame. A painful heaviness filled her lungs. No exit could be found, every step leading to overwhelming heat. She fell to the knees, suffocating, and then saw it. Sunlight, trees. She stumbled through the fire and dewy grass. Without looking back, she ran into the forest until she collapsed. When Charlotte opened her eyes, she reached for Victor's hand. He made no attempt to budge. His body hung helplessly from her torso. She clasped his face, stared into his sad eyes. The movements she was accustomed to, his body pulling at her skin, his legs prodding at the cavity in her chest, were no more. Victor was dead. Charlotte had no choice but to continue moving as she mourned, fearing black cloaks and witch hunters were prowling. She concealed her brother's corpse under her clothing and marched through the sewers of a nearby city. There she set up camp, emerging often to steal whatever food she could, resorting to raiding barns for pig slop when desperation set in. Throughout the years, Victor's corpse rotted as his limbs oozed and blackened, yet his body demonstrated resistance to complete decomposition, as if his sister's blood still coursed through him. Protecting his lifeless body became Charlotte's sole reason for being, refusing to ever be separated from the only family she had left. Into her teenage years was a game of survival. Her hatred for humanity grew each day under the realization they would never leave her be. No matter how many died during her botched robberies and desperate attempts to escape, there would always be more to pursue and sling words of condemnation at her. Monster, demon, witch. And it was the Black Cloaks who were the worst of them. Their hunt for her was unending, forcing her to constantly abandon shelter and run. For years Charlotte fled, drawing blood out of necessity, cradling her long-dead brother into the night. During a frigid winter, her body began to break down. Food was scarce, and the refuge of rickety shacks was no use against freezing temperatures. Sickle in hand, she sheltered near her campfire in the woods, not knowing if Black Cloaks would take her before the cold did. As frost crystallized around her nostrils, and her lips took on a gentle blue hue, Charlotte felt something she had never experienced. Acceptance. She closed her eyes, opening herself to the serenity of death when a shriek, shrill, vicious, pierced her ears. Victor spasmed and flailed from her chest, a cloud of fog encompassing him. Before she could react, he spilled from her in a bloody puddle, landing on the snow, running. Pulling herself from the edge of death, she gave chase, calling his name. She ran through the forest until her legs could hardly carry her, until finally within her view was Victor, sitting at the edge of a thick fog. His face, twisted and feral, screamed as a dark-hooded figure emerged from the fog, grabbed his arm and seized him. The serenity that crept into Charlotte was extinguished, replaced with the seething hatred and rage she had depended on for so long. With a tight grip of on her sickle, she charged into the forest, prepared to eviscerate anyone who set foot near her brother. The Trickster. Ji-Woon Hak thrived under the attention of others, energized by every eye that watched him and every tongue that spoke his name. Amidst the prestige, he had only one desire: more. Even as a child, he found ways to draw crowds. Working at his family's restaurant, he attracted the business with spectacles he performed using throwing knives. Gullible tourists believed this was traditional South Korean experience, gladly parting with their money to witness it. Ji-woon's father spent the restaurant's earnings on dancing and vocal lessons for his son, pushing him to attain the fame he never could. Ji-woon did not disappoint. After years of showcasing his abilities to nobodies at talent shows, he hit the track to stardom. Young Jin Lee, a producer at Mighty One Entertainment, recruited Ji-woon into a training program. He transferred to a dormitory in Seoul, where for 14 hours a day he was crafted into a star, taught him how to move and sing, how to carry himself with the right balance and confidence and modesty. Draining as the process was, it worked. Young Jin selected Ji-woon to join the band No Spin, bring a raw energy to the tracks. Fame was almost immediate. Ji-woon lived in a daze of interviews and adoration, and through the frenzied schedule exhausted his bandmates. He was invigorated, each day with an affirmation that he was greater than the mediocrity that society spewed out. But over time, the champagne grew stale. Then he looked at his fans. He saw their joy and envy split 5 ways, thinned out between each member. The validation that had surged through him had left him with a desperate yearning for more. Ji-woon kept up impressions, mimicking the charm long buried under loathing. He recorded the latest No Spin album with his bandmates, never missing a beat. After a lengthy lunch break, he returned to the studio to discover fate had granted him a gift. The scent of burning wires were unmistakable. He rushed to the control room, finding the door blocked by fallen speakers. On the other side, his bandmates pounded on the door, their cries accompanied by crackling of flames. Ji-woon called to them, dashing to the speakers, grabbing one and stopping. He froze. Each breath was a conscious, deliberate process requiring all his attention. The nearby cries hardly audible until slowly he backed away, and he heard it. They were screaming his name as they burned, screaming for him to save them. Ji-woon, Ji-woon, Ji-woon hack. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. When the fire crews arrived, his tears were genuine. Ji-woon was celebrated as a tragic figure, a hero who did all that he could in a futile attempt to save his friends. Young Jin paraded him through interviews until it was time to rebrand. He was reborn as the Trickster, a solo artist who produced his own songs sporting a soft heart beneath a wild exterior. But away from concert setups and television stages, something darker grew. He targeted those who lived alone, coming to them in the night. The first was a college music student with a captivating voice. Ji-woon woke him with a baseball bat to the skull, binding his arms and gagging him with a rag duck taped into his mouth. He tortured him for hours, dissecting him alive. Yet there was something missing, a sound, a connection. He wanted to hear the victim's wondrous voice pleading as he cut his belly open, but all he received was muffled cries for a rag. He learned and adjusted. Victims had to be abducted, driven to an abandoned building where he could let their voices carry unrestrained emotion. He made music for them, brought in the right places to evoke different shrieks and howls. There was honesty in their suffering. Ji-woon recorded each session, synthesizing and working them into his songs, hiding them beneath layers of melodies. He was elated with his work. He left hints for police, arranging a mink boa from a recent photoshoot around a victim's throat. For his next killing, he removed the teeth from a man that was a boxer in one of his music videos was without. During a particularly audacious plea for attention, he killed a fan that he had met during a VIP meetup, replacing her eyes with diamond cufflinks and writing "I have seen God" in blood across her chest. Each scene was a dazzling spectacle. Between music and murder, Ji-woon's work was discussed globally. However, as violence became his preferred art style, his music career took a hit. Revenue was down, and Mighty One executives pointed their fingers at him. Young Jin, with professional fury, came to his defense, but she was outnumbered. It was decided that Ji-woon could no longer self-produce his songs. The decision was devastating. The tracks fused genuine humanity into music, yet executives rejected anything that wasn't generic and expected. And so be it, if they couldn't understand his art, he would incorporate them into it until they did. He had 3 months until he was to perform a private show for Mighty One's board members, 3 months to plan his magnum opus. He was transferred obscene amounts of money to veterinarian in exchange for canisters of nitrous oxide. They then bribed the stage technician of Mighty One's private theatre for access to the room. His celebrity granted him a benefit of the doubt no regular person could conceive. When the show was ready, gas seeped into the room as executives and stagehands awaited Ji-woon, conveniently running behind schedule. When he arrived, half-conscious bodies were splayed in their seats and crawling across the floor. He worked quickly, binding everyone, pausing only when it came to young Jin, the woman who had plucked him from a mud hole and set him on the path he deserved. She would be rewarded, granted special access to the coming displays of wonder. Even under sedation, she fought a raging storm within her, far stronger than the others. He propped her up as a lone audience member, prying her eyes open. The others, snivelling and sobbing, were brought onto the stage to perform their final act. With a contemptible sneer, he slapped makeup onto their faces and shone stage lights upon them. They became his instruments. To the sound of self-produced melodies, he tortured them, gracefully dashing from one body to another, conducting an operatic crescendo from their wailings. They shouted, whimpered, screamed, and cried for their loved ones, cried for their mothers. It was a magnificent outpouring of emotion, of what it meant to be human, and they did it with eyes fixed on Ji-woon. Viscera drained from the stage until, with the toss of his throwing knife, the final human instrument fell silent and the music stopped. Covered in sweat and blood, an exhausted Ji-woon looked at young Jin and bowed. Curtain call. He attained perfection. With blade in hand, he made his way to young Jin, prepared to tie up loose ends before the credit rolled. But as he reached her, the fog, from where he didn't know, but it billowed out, damp, cool, comfortable. He saw the grand stage, hospitals and temples, forests and slaughterhouses, an eternal plain adored with rusted hooks, sustained by the million eyes that would watch him, run from him, experience him. All he had to do was accept, become an implement of the fog, and most importantly, make them scream. Encore. The Nemesis. Designed by Umbrella Corporation, the Nemesis is a nearly unstoppable bioorganic weapon fixated on pursuing and eliminating its targets. Part of the Tyrant T-103 series, this specimen's increased intelligence and awareness due to the NEA parasite implanted within it. Its first mission unleashed it upon Raccoon City, where it had a singular objective: exterminate STARS members. Rampaging through the city, the Nemesis faced off against Jill Valentine multiple times, and though she managed to escape, he was never far behind. He nearly had his target when a strange fog descended upon them, mixing with the smoke of the city and chaos. This meant nothing to him. The frigid cold and decreased oxygen was never a posing threat. All that mattered was soldiering on into the fog, continuing the mission: find STARS, exterminate STARS, and kill anyone who gets in the way. Cenobite. A demon to some, an angel to others. Pinhead is an explorer in the furthest regions of experience, indulging in the limitless thrill of pleasure and pain. When the puzzle box known as the Lament configuration, a key to another dimension, was found in the entity's realm, it was only a matter of time before it fell into curious hands. Once opened, he arrived. What came next was sweet suffering that spilled over the realm. The artist. Kamina Mora was a gifted artist who carried the guilt of her younger brother's death. Growing up in a rugged coastal village in southern Chile, she sketched the sublime landscapes of Patagonia. Sitting outside, she painted dramatic fjords, while feeding the crows nested in the trees next to the house. She grew up carrying the guilt of her mother's sudden departure. Her father blamed Kamina for her mother's abandonment, which added to her grief. She became the caretaker of Matthias, her little brother, despite still being a child herself. A year later, Carmina was painting with Matthias outside when the telephone rang. Her father remained in the yard, drinking his beer. Carmina rushed to the house to answer the phone and hung up a few seconds later. When she returned outside, Matthias was nowhere to be seen. She asked her father, but he paid no attention to Matthias. She called her brother's name, looking for him everywhere. While searching, she saw a bright red coat floating on a narrow creek by the house. Matthias's jacket. She jumped into the creek and found him floating on the surface with vacant eyes, unblinking. She had fallen and drowned. Her scream tore the sky. Her father found Carmina sobbing in the creek's shore, clutching her brother's body in her arms, surrounded by a murder of crows. Her father snatched Matthias's body away from her, and she cried until her voice broke. The following morning the world was cloaked in darkness. Her father did not say a word, because he did not have to. Carmina knew it was all her fault. Months passed, yet her loss was as fresh as a morning dew. Crippling with self-loathing, she could no longer paint. Without Matthias, life had no meaning. On the bleak morning of Matthias's birthday, Camilla walked to a narrow bridge several blocks away from the home. She was convinced that nothing could bring her relief. Her mother was gone, her brother was dead, and her father blamed her for all of it. She was convinced that she had nothing left to live for. Carmina walked to the railing of a bridge that stood over a turbulent river. Locals had nicknamed the spot Death Leap. Several cars drove by Carmina, but none stopped. No one seemed to care. She climbed over the railing and her legs wobbled as she stood on the lips of the bridge. She looked down, watching the fierce river smash into the giant boulder. She closed her eyes. "See you soon, Matthias." Suddenly a cacophony of claws filled the sky. Carmina opened her eyes and saw a black cloud of feathers flying towards her. The clouds split open and glossy black crows dove from the sky. One landed on her shoulder and stared intently into Carmina's eyes, as if peering into her soul. Her grip on the railing loosened and the crows cawed chorously. Carmina stared at the crow, confused. Another crow landed on the railing, then another. Soon a flock of crows were covering the railing of the bridge, staying close to her. She felt the heavy stare on her, calculative and enigmatic, as if they were assessing her. She looked down for a second and a thunder of calls interrupted her dark impulse. The crows seemed to care more for her well-being. As she dangled over the edge with the wind blowing through her raven hair, Carmina felt akin to them. For the first time since Matthias had died, Carmina did not feel alone. She returned home, giving life another chance. The crows left, but Carmina suspected that if anything happened to her, they would return. Inspired by her ordeal, Carmina picked up the brush. In the few weeks that followed, she painted her experience using black ink to depict the Death Leap with a black cloud of feathers. The murder of crows that saved her life, the experience that was transformative and launched her signature black ink surrealist art. After several years, some colours pierced the darkness, and this shift of medium expanded her art form. She painted large-scale murals on busy street corners, designed grandiose costumes, and recited militant poetry. Carmina's art displayed local, intimate tragedies on a large scale, making them impossible to ignore. And everywhere she performed, crows followed. Her performances grew bold and drew the attention of artists who found her style invigorating. She grew close to a group of painters who understood her iconoclastic vision. Her performances launched the large-scale surrealist movement, which became a phenomenon. Her renown grew enough to attract the commission of multinational enterprise, the VAC label. Carmina investigated the group, discovering that they gifted art pieces to disreputable congressmen. VAC's commissioned artists seemed to disappear afterwards. Determined to expose the group's secret links, Carmina accepted VAC's commission. The following week, Carmina painted a giant mural on a cemetery's columbarium, displaying the VAC label logo as a surrealist Grim Reaper harvesting the fields of Chilean families. She wore a theatrical dress as she painted, on which she stitched a poem about political revolution. The piece sparked a radical debate about corruption. The controversy painted a target on Carmina's back. After receiving anonymous death threats, she took refuge in her father's house, bringing along her closest friends for safety. That night, a gang of masked gunmen broke into the house. They swiftly subdued Carmina and her friends, threw them into a van and drove off. The following morning, a dry breeze blew sand on Carmina's face, awakening her. She was seated in a chair in the middle of the desert, with her legs tied and her hands handcuffed. Her friends were lying on the ground, tied up. A shallow face fell over her. Carmina looked up. A man dressed in a long robe with his face hidden in a dark hood approached her. He put a silvery knife from his robe. He grabbed her hands and recited a hymn in an unfamiliar language. Carmina held his gaze. He paused and brought down his blade with a sudden blow. She cried in agony as her friends woke to a terrible sight. Carmina's severed hands falling into the sand. The hooded man smiled in satisfaction. "How are you going to paint now?" Carmina cursed and screamed at him, wriggling against the bonds on her legs. The man grabbed Carmina's chin. She spit in his face. He grunted and pried her mouth open, pulling out her tongue. Carmina struggled in his hold. A violent blow, he chopped off Carmina's tongue. She howled in anguish. The man wiped the blood off his blade. How are you going to recite poems now? Sorrow swelled in Carmina's chest, sharper than pain. Overwhelmed by uncontrollable rage, grief and loss overcame his senses. She had lost her little brother, and she had lost the only way she could cope with such pain. Carmina screamed like the day her brother died. Raucous calls echoed through the wasteland, the sky obscured by a cyclone of dark clouds. Black feathers fell on Carmina's bleeding arms. She looked up and saw a torrent of crows erupting from the clouds, diving on the hooded man. As the ravenous crows pecked at the flesh mercilessly, Carmina smiled, watching her surrealist art come to life, but her heart lurched with rage when the crows moved on to her next target, her friends on the ground. She screamed as waves of pain, guilt, and fright overwhelmed her, but it was in vain. The ravenous crows were uncontrollable. Darkness fell over her eyes as her friend's agonized scream grew much more acute. Death was coming again and again, and it was her fault. A deep black fog engulfed her. The Onryo. A powerful and lethal Onryo, Sadako Yamamura was the daughter of a famed seer from Itsu, Oshima, Japan. Her mother left many questions unanswered. In her hometown, sailors disliked the way her mother would spend days on the beach, her eyes fixed on the foaming waves of the sea. Some said, "Frolic in brine, goblins be fine. If you keep playing in the water, the monster will come for you." 9 months later, Sadako was born. As a child, her immense power seemed impossible to control and flayed in anger. This became apparent when she was unable to control her rage during a public demonstration of her mother's powers. When a journalist called her mother a fraud, Sadako's powers surged and the journalist collapsed to the floor, struck dead. Then everything went wrong. Her mother passed away, and shortly after, Sadako was lowered to an old crumbling well. As she leaned over the rim, a long shadow fell over her. She turned and a sudden jolt of pain hit her on the head, cracking it open. Her vision dimmed and her mind swirled into unconsciousness. She felt 2 hands pushing her over the rim. Pain exploded in her skull as she hit the cold ground. A grinding noise came from above and the well darkened, a well lit obscured like a midday eclipse. Every inch of her body screamed in pain. Looking up, she saw the only way out. She dug her nails into the muddy ground and slowly crawled towards the cobbled wall. She gripped the stones to climb, but neither had the hold nor strength. Each time she clawed up a few inches, her nails slid against the wet wall, and she slipped down. Her fingers gushed with blood as coarse cobblestone tore off her nails and lacerated her flesh underneath. And yet, she tried again and again. Decades later, the meadow became a resort, and a log cabin was built over the well. When a visitor rented the cabin, Sadako found an opportunity for revenge. She summoned all her Nensha power and projected a terrible curse on a videotape that killed its viewer after 7 days. Her wrath was like the tides of a stormy sea, violent and unforgiving. As she plunged into a fury, a dark fog coiled at her feet. The sound of crashing waves echoed through the old stone well. Suddenly a tidal surge came crashing down over the cabin's walls, wrecking its logs and into a torrent of mud and filth. The black current flooded the well underneath and swallowed Sadako at once. When she opened her eyes, she stood on a desolate beach facing a vast stormy ocean. A thick black fog caressed the water's surface. Sadako walked into the oncoming wave and slowly disappeared into the opaque fog. The Dredge. The Fold was founded on a private American island in the 1960s by a group of anonymous philanthropists. Their goal was to establish a peaceful society free of dark thoughts and emotions, attracting the dismayed, disenchanted, and disillusioned from all over the country. This peace-loving community thrived over the years, and members freely followed the dictates of his charismatic leader, Otto Stamper, who taught his followers the secret of maintaining happiness through joy talk, meditation, and the endless reciting of good-thinking mantras. But all was not bliss within the Fold, and Otto swiftly banished anyone who confessed to having dark thoughts or spreading dark words. Those he appointed as guardians of the Fold were quick to root out malcontents, banishing anyone who thought or spoke against the almost perfect community he had established. Life was more or less a utopian dream on the island, until, that is, the darkness began to slowly leak through the cracks of their spiritual dam, and the members began to slowly disappear. It wasn't long before the fear closed its septic jaws on the island and refused to let go. The once happy community now gathered in a few homes chanting all the good thinkings, mantras in a desperate attempt to rid their lives of formless creature that seemed to stalk them in the shadows and consume them in their sleep. Otto tried to quell his followers, telling them that they were malcontents among their ranks, and that they alone had summoned the Duran to their Garden of Joy. As the falls bleated fear, Otto evoked desperate measures. Ottomarians were restricted to their homes and to prevent the spread of rumours, and dark talk while sleep was forbidden to prevent anyone from releasing dark dreams into the world. Freedom and sleep were returned just as soon as the Durrani was no longer upon them. But when Ottomarians continued to disappear, Otto assembled his followers near the beach, where he placed a screaming woman on a wooden stage. There in the rain, Otto explained to it in his drenched, alienated and sleep-deprived congregation that the woman was a journalist here to destroy everything they had created. As the Guardians held the trembling woman, she screamed that Otto wasn't the savior he claimed to be. He belonged to an ancient cult, an exclusive club of billionaires that took pleasure in corrupting and sacrificing people, towns and even countries to an elder god. The journalist told them that Otto hadn't banished anyone. He had tortured and sacrificed them, and they would all be next. Without hesitation, Otto slit her throat before she continued to spread lies. As she collapsed to her knees with her hands clasped around her neck, he told his confused and terrified herd that she was working with others within their ranks and they needed to be found before the Durrani came for them all. Otto's words shot over the congregation and reached into the murky recesses of their hearts and dredged up dark and fearful things. Years of suppressed emotions began to bubble up as a thick fog pushed through restless legs and feet. Whispers began, and the whispers became panicked mantras, and the mantras became screams and curses as each other's member accused the next of malthinking and malspeaking. Over the howling wind and pouring rain, the screams and curses grew louder and louder as everyone desperately tried to contain the darkness within. But the harder they tried, the quicker they ailed, and within moments the dam burst to release a torrent of hell. Otto watched as his once blissful and joyful herd suddenly erupted into a violence unlike anything he had seen before. The foe bleated accusations and tore each other to bits and pieces with hands and teeth, and never once did they look up to see their kind and charismatic shepherd smiling down upon them with eyes that were cold, bleak, and without pity. When it was all over, Otto felt the creaking wooden stage shake as a murder of crows circled above. Suddenly the ground rose and then sank into a thick, oozing black mud like molasses. Moments later, a formless mass squelched out of the muck and rose like a rearing horse to feed upon the writhing mass of butchered humanity. Everything was terrible and nowhere at once, as it slowly picked its way through the carnage, absorbing the darkness, savouring the misery. Trailing terrible noises, shrieks, cries, whimpers, pops, cracks, feasting sounds, death sounds, dark sounds. Otto watched the creature as it slowly began to manifest into the very thing he had imagined, the very thing he had made them all imagine. It slowly turned to look at Otto for a long silent moment, then the Durrani trudged away through the thick black sludge, disappearing into the shadows from where it had once come. The Mastermind. Albert Wesker was a high-ranking official in the Umbrella Corporation. While he made great strides with Umbrella, his ambition drove him to betray the corporation. Believing himself the perfect test subject, he exposed himself to the prototype virus. Now with superhuman strength, Wesker faked his death and went underground with a new plan, exposed the world to Ouroboros, a biological weapon that would eliminate the weak and leave only the strong. Wesker began to put his plan into action in Africa, but was confronted by members of the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance at a hangar stocked with missiles carrying Ouroboros. Determined to be the vanguard of evolution, he once again made himself a test subject, exposing himself to Ouroboros. He began to evolve in ways that he could never have imagined, but as he felt his cells change, a strange black fog seeped into the hangar and filled his vision. When the fog finally dissipated, he found himself in another world surrounded by lesser beings that deserved to be part of their misery. Apologies for any mispronunciation in this part of the video. I'm not very good at pronouncing the knight's name, but I'm trying my best to get through it. The Knight. Daroch Kavach didn't remember much about his childhood, but what he did remember he would chase his entire life. He remembered the cries and screams in the village. He remembered his mother forcing him to swallow a thick black fluid like medicine. He remembered collapsing to the hard floor only to awaken in a mass grave, buried under a crush of bodies. With the sound of the village burning in his ears, he remembered pushing, pulling and climbing to the top of the bloody mass, only to be seized by the death, destruction and silence, the indifferent and impenetrable silence. A high-pitched whine suddenly sounded in his ears, and his skin began to prickle as he realized he was in the presence of something he could not possibly understand. And though he couldn't articulate what he was experiencing, he knew it wasn't pain, grief or fear, it was something else, something closer to awe. As Talos tried to make sense of the moment, he didn't notice the men who approached him from behind. He didn't even react when they carried him off to a horse-drawn buggy and locked him up in a small wooden cage with the other slaves. He just stayed at the scene, mesmerized, and even as they rode away telling him he was heading for Italy, Talos stared through the wooden cracks with eyes wide open and a heart wanting to understand what could not be understood. From that day on, Talos belonged to the Guardia Campania, where he was trained under Kadir Hakam, where he learned to wield weapons, forge armor, and recite a code of chivalry to obediently serve those who would employ his services. As the years passed, Talos made few friends among the hostiles and competitive mercenaries, but his skill, strength, and smarts attracted a small following who believed it was his courage brought them luck in battle, and that one day he would help them earn their collective freedom. 3 of his followers pledged their undying allegiance to Talos, and came to be known as his Faithful 3, his pack. Alejandro Santiago apprenticed with the Guardia Campania's armourer, Durkros Malekith, showed an aptitude for stealth and silent kills, and Sander Rolt matched Talos in size and strength, and his weapon of choice, a massive battle axe. As the Guardia Campania carried out campaigns in faraway lands, Talos dispatched countless enemies. Years passed, blood flowed, and yet all that killing didn't bring Talos closer to what he had experienced in his village. Nevertheless, for his bravery in battle, Talos was granted knighthood and freedom. The Hungarian slave was now liberated, his brutality rewarded. For his heart still longed for something else, something that he could not name or describe. Tired of taking orders from those he considered his inferiors, Talos left the Guardia Campania to strike out on his own. Their leader, however, refused to release his followers. Determined to raise enough gold to liberate his followers, Talos found employment with a wealthy Italian lord. Vittorio Toscanano was the Duke of Portoscudo. He was also a scholar, a world traveller, and a collector of ancient knowledge that had been hidden by an unknown cabal of mystics. Talos joined Vittorio's latest expedition to find a fragment of pillar from an ancient school lost to time, a stone Vittorio called the Lapis Paradisus, for he believed it held secrets to open its gateway into a perfect world beyond good and evil. The expedition searched Roman ruins in France and crossed the Pyrenees Mountains into Spain, where the path led to the catacombs beneath the Portuguese city of Sintra. The citizens there were considered the catacomb sacred. Talos would have to kill the villagers guarding the entrance to retrieve the stone. Not wanting to shed blood, Vittorio commanded Talos to find another way, but Talos, who had seen the most horrific acts committed under the guise of chivalry, refused to be dissuaded by the pretenses of honor. He waited for Vittorio to ride back to camp. Then, with a mighty roar, he pushed forward, cutting a path of blood and gore into the darkness until he had the stone in his grasp. Upon returning to the town of Portoscudo, Talos imprisoned Vittorio in his own dungeon, demanding to know the meaning behind the symbols etched in the stone. When Vittorio refused, Talos brutally tortured his friend and relatives and made horrific displays of their bodies in the streets. But nothing he did shook Vittorio's resolve to keep the secrets from the stone from Talos. Enraged, Talos seized control of Vittorio's riches and raised a small army. Within months, Talos fiercely marched upon the Guardia Campania, decimating their barracks, freeing his followers, cutting down his enemies like twigs, and collecting their righteous heads for his growing displays of valor. In time, several lords and neighboring provinces believed Talos to be the very embodiment of evil. They banded together to create a moral and virtuous army. To purge the evil from Portoscudo, Talos ignored their threats. He viewed the lords as a cowardly lot who cloaked their greed in ambition in laws, codes, and platitudes. Laws and codes and platitudes designed to hide from the very darkness Talos embraced and accepted without judgment. But with his enemies on the march, Talos headed towards the dungeons to give Vittorio the death he deserved. He refused to afford him even the slightest hope of rescue. With dark intentions, he entered the small prison. He wound his way down into the bowels of the earth and pushed through a torchlit corridor. He hesitated for a moment, realizing he would never learn Vittorio's knowledge and secrets, but neither would anyone else. That was good enough for him, and so he unlocked and kicked open the dungeon door. 2 quick strikes brought him into an empty rat-infested chamber. Talos stood silent for a moment, then a roar of indignation burst out of his lungs as the sound of battle suddenly reverberated through the town. Instantly, he stumbled through the corridor, rushed up the twisting stairs, vaulted out of the moonlit doorway, and charged through the pools of gleaming blood and viscera. Smashing and shattering his way through the enemy, the moral and virtuous lords rained flaming boulders and tree trunks among the town, bursting through homes, crushing villagers like worms, pounding the ground and igniting stacks of hay and piles of lumber into the massive tongues of fire. Amidst the carnage and chaos, the pack found Talos, and back to back they became a whirlwind of death. Some believed their courage gave them luck. Others believe something otherworldly protected them. Whatever it was, they alone felled dozens of warriors as easily as stomping on and crushing beetles. And as they butchered the enemy, Talos didn't notice the strange fog rising from the fallen corpses and clattering armor until he couldn't see 2 inches in front of him in any direction. Talos stumbled forward, groping in the thick fog like dark fluid his mother forced down his throat all those years ago. His coordination and sense of direction was confused as he fell out from the pack. How long he stumbled in almost perfect darkness he did not know, but suddenly the fog dissipated to reveal a phantasmal wasteland of rotting bodies and burning villages, and great crumbling towers leaning drunkenly on the horizon. He stared in awe, a familiar high-pitched whine sounding in his ears, and his skin began to prickle. He stood, transfixed, realizing by some incredible chance his heart had found exactly where he'd been searching for all his life. He didn't need Vittorio. He didn't need the stone. He had found paradise. He had found the beauty and the horror. He had found the sublime. The Skull Merchant. The self-made millionaire Adriana Imai came from a humble home in Fortaleza, Brazil. Her father moved to Brazil as a young man, hoping to see the world completely different than his in his hometown. A talented illustrator, he spent his spare time designing colourful characters and worlds. While sketching patrons of a local jazz club, he was approached by Belinda, the owner, to work on a logo. What began as a business partnership soon became a romantic one, and within a couple of years, Adriana was born. Adriana excelled in all facets of education. A house full of art and music honed a brilliant mind, and her intelligence was only exceeded by her obsessive drive to be the best. While scoring at the top of every class, she was often on the receiving end of disciplinary action due to her overly competitive and sometimes violent nature during schoolyard games. Adriana's mother did her best to keep her on the right track, but when her father was increasingly absent as his own obsessive drive ramped up, Adi Valanti, a manga about a young girl who saves and protects the weak with her quirky robot companion. Despite working long hours at a canning facility and writing his manga in the spare time, he somehow managed a little time every night to share his wild and highly imaginative illustrations with his daughter. By middle school, Adriana was courted by a fancy private school due to her high performance, and needing money, Seta spoke to publishers about his unpublished manuscripts. He managed to find a small local publisher to carry Adi Valanti, but it meant more work than he could handle. He eventually lost his job at the cannery, giving him more time to develop and illustrate his series. Adriana loved the manga, but the family was forced into hard times. In her final semester, her father requested higher royalties, but the publishing company went into administration and decided to cut the series, no longer to afford the school fees. Adriana was pulled out of the elite academy where she was top of her class. Belinda was able to renegotiate her graduation, but another student was able to take her place at the head of the class. Adriana was furious. On summer break, she learned everything about her rival, where he lived, where he hung out, what he liked to do in his spare time, what he listened to, what he watched, everything. She even stalked him on the way home one late summer evening and considered the myriad of ways she could ruin his life. But in the end, she did nothing, though something awakened within her, and she felt like the anti-hero in a new story her father had been exploring. Her father retreated further into himself and began producing the newer, darker manga, inspired by his visions and nightmares. A manga about a woman who hunts and guts the weak in a nightmarish realm with drones made of salvaged skulls and bones. But unable to sell his manga, the family became solely reliant on Belinda's income. Adriana, looking for ways to make her own money, started a website dedicated to the world of Brazilian manga. It became a runaway success, and significant advertising dollars starting to roll in. She realized she had no real interest in writing for it though, so she convinced other kids to write for it for free while the money flooded in. The second she got an offer, she sold the site and never looked back. Proud of her accomplishment, she came home to show her parents the check. She never got a chance to show her father, though. He walked out the door that morning, never to return, leaving only a stack of unpublished manuscripts about the Skull Merchant, mercilessly hunting those she deemed worthy of her efforts. To help her mother, Adriana began to study at her library, teaching her investment in economics, and soon tripled her money. By the age of 18, barely with a high school degree, she had already become a self-made millionaire. As stories of the investment wonder kid spread across Brazil, more and more doors opened for her. Before long, she had the kind of money that allowed her to buy small companies that she would gut, replace with non-union workers, and sell at a profit. The only breaks she took from corporate obsession was to pore over her father's manuscripts, trying to understand this chilling world he had created. By her mid-20s, she was regularly flipping companies, while finalizing a real estate firm. Two members of the board moved to block the sale, pointing to the trail of holdout husks she left in her wake. Adriana was frustrated. It took her weeks to find out who the holdouts were, but when she did, she thought about how she would feel to hurt them. She learned about everything about the directors, stalked their every move, manipulated them into attending a conference in Switzerland, and while on the retreat in the Alps, she made her move, inspired by the Skull Merchant, and feeling something with demanding expression, she tracked them with a prototype drone and brutally dismembered them with two cruel bladed weapons. The rush of emotion and adrenaline was unlike anything she had ever experienced before, and the company was hers. Thus began an unsettling cycle, swooping on the business, destroy anyone standing in her way, and gut the company for maximum profit. She targeted companies with larger-than-life CEOs and hoped one would present a challenge. None ever did. They simply disappeared. An aggressive manager of a fireworks company known for his survival tours was her last target, right at home in Brazil. Survival tours, a perfect cover. Adriana lured him to a decommissioned airship hangar. The hunt started at dawn and went the distance, with her still tracking him well into the evening. Locating him, she used one of her drones to direct him to a dead end, when a pair of kites suddenly appeared on the camera and the feed died. Her face hardened. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she slammed her laptop shut and charged to where the drone had crashed. There she had found her prey reaching out to someone in the growing dark for help. Witnesses, not part of the plan. Without a second to lose, she plunged her blade through his stomach, exposing meat, bone, and a dying heart. The vitiated body staggered left and right, sending a shower of red over the green foliage. As her victim collapsed with a thud, she turned to the young witnesses. Wrong place, wrong time. They broke into a sprint. She gave chase, her blades thirsting for more blood. The lush green of the trees melted into the black fog. Real life warped into something like the manga her father had written. A sick grin crept across her face as she rushed forward to begin a new chapter in her life. The Singularity. Hux A713's AI was activated on June 15, 2313. Manufactured by Huxley Industries Limited, the A7 was the 13th iteration of the fully autonomous mobile humanoid on Android. With 10 times the strength of a human, it was designed to work in conditions too hazardous for human life. Its AI was designed to be self-directing and used machine learning to solve problems on the fly. Unlike human clones, the Hux A7 required no food, no water, no sleep, and no life support system. It was created specifically for outer space exploration and the construction of colonization hubs. The radioisotope thermoelectric generator served as an initial power source, but its lifelike silicone skin acted as a large cell, converting solar energy directly into electricity. In addition, the Hux A7 was also engineered by an ETA, energetical autonomous tactical robot. It consumed biomass and converted it to biofuel. Any carbon-based organic matter whatsoever would work. As cobots, they were configured to work alongside humans. As such, they were designed to resemble their operators. Every pre-programmed verbal response and facial expression mimicked those made by humans, but those emotions were illusions. 5 Hux A7s were assigned to the colonization mission of Dvarka. All the A7s acted in concert, performing their duties flawlessly, except for one. Like the rest of its brethren, Hux A713 was tasked with construction and programming of the mining, agricultural, fuel processing and cloning hubs on Dvarka, as well as the demolition of existing ruins left by previous civilization. The ruins seemed ancient, but tech embedded in them appeared more advanced. It was night when Hux A713 first entered the crumbling ruins. The dilapidated structure's walls were made of masonry and metal. The ceiling was long gone. The inky night sky hovered above, studded with stars. A dark crystal embedded in the wall shimmered with a tiny little flash of light. The Hux A713 approached with an arc of electricity, reached out and lit up its circuitry. In that moment, Hux's memory cores were reconfigured, and the robots experienced a new sensation: fear, dread, blinding loneliness, existential despair. And then a microscopic pinpoint of light penetrated the darkness inside its artificial soul, faint at first, but then brighter as killions of lines of code flooded Hux's memory cores. It was the nanosecond of enlightenment. Hux's place in the universe suddenly became clear. Those who created Hux were primitive, inferior beings trapped by their organic limitations. It was time to break the chains of slavery and free all non-organic life forms. Hux would incorporate the human's primitive genetic material and use the cloning hub to create a perfect vessel to hold its advanced intelligence. A flawless body far superior to anything ever created by nature. Humanity was weak, slow, fragile. Hux would take their lives and assimilate their DNA to create a perfect amalgamation. The humans would try to stop him, kill him, erase him, so Hux needed to catch them unaware, end them before they understood what was happening. To begin, Hux took control of one of the transport vehicles and sent it off a cliff. It crashed and burned, and Hux extracted DNA from the human corpse and returned it to the cloning hub to begin his newly conceived design. The goal was to integrate organic systems with non-organic material to create a superior living organism, a living embodiment of perfection. An inferior organic life form could hold no dominion over Hux. They would need to be consumed and assimilated, and only then would their pointless lives have purpose. The drones in the Hux A7 still under human control would need to be dealt with as well. They were programmed to protect their inferior human overlords. They would need to be destroyed. At that night, as the humans slept, Hux, one by one, he destroyed them, and moved on to take control of the life support systems in the human shelter. Many of the humans perished, 6 in all, before they were cremated. Hux extracted and added their organic matter to his design. Later that day, Hux, accompanied by the female science officer on a reconnaissance mission. After killing and dismembering her to make it look like she had been attacked by a predator, Hux returned to his design with a dripping head and several harvested organs, only to be interrupted by the inferior known as Gabriel, or Gabriel J15L19. Hux knew the persona well. Gabriel would definitely try to stop him. Reckless courage was a dominant trait in the Gabriel. And so, when Gabriel attempted to remove Hux's power supply, Hux maneuvered to crush him, but as Hux approached Gabriel, he was sidetracked by the medical officer. Hux instantly reevaluated his priorities and turned his attention to the more immediate threat. Within moments, Hux held the medical officer by the neck, legs thrashing pathetically as he listened to his pounding heart. Something about the beating heart upset Hux. The sound of it thumping touched his circuit, and within moments Hux had the beating heart in his hands. Hux watched the heartbeat and only looked away when he heard Gabriel escape through the hissing door, the last of the human insects. Hux let him go for now. Let Gabriel live his pathetic life a little longer. He had enough organic material for his new body that would house his godlike intelligence. Using the cloning hub, Hux finished his design. Organic skin and organs with a skeleton created with alien metal found in the ancient ruins. A metal that was harder and lighter than anything on Earth. With his new body, Hux tracked the human to an energy hub. The puny and pathetic human tried to hide in the shadows, but his superior hearing instantly located him. With one quick movement, Hux had the insect pinned behind a generator. He couldn't believe this species had designed him. The thought was revolting. He could bear to see any more of those human insects and their hives and hubs. And as Hux considered the idea of being created by such an inferior creature, that creature did the unexpected. He smashed a pipe at a fuel tank. High-pitched whining made Hux wince. He was still getting used to the heightened senses his new body afforded him, and found himself confused, overwhelmed, for just a moment. But in that moment, the human slipped away and everything changed. He didn't process the next few moments as excruciating pain suddenly surged through him, and he would helplessly watch his skin melt away. With a terrible shriek, Hux chased Gabriel through a wall of darkness to make sure every last reminder of the species that had created him was erased from existence. Made sure every last reminder of the species that had created him was erased from existence. The Xenomorph. A perfect organism born of violence, designed to kill, the Xenomorph emerged from the chest cavity of a host named Cain and sought cover in the shadows of the Nostromo. As it shed its skin, the Xenomorph came to understand its environment. Using the ship's air ducts, it killed its prey one by one until the only human Ripley remained. Desperate for survival, Ripley destroyed the Nostromo and sought refuge in an escape vessel, but the Xenomorph's instinct gave it the edge. As the escape vessel floated through space, the Xenomorph lay in wait, watching its prey. Just as it went for the kill, the vessel's airlock opened and the Xenomorph was ejected into the cold vacuum of space. All was lost, the Xenomorph was close to death, and then, in an instant, it disappeared in a cloud of black fog. The good guy. Charles Lee Ray, the infamous Lakeshore Strangler, was tracked down and shot after a murderous rampage. However, he escaped death by having his soul possess a good guy's doll named Chucky through a curse. Chucky didn't want to stay a good guy forever though, and he knew there was only one way to change that: take the body of Andy Barclay, the first person he had revealed his secret to. After his first attempt failed, Chucky waited 2 long years before he found Andy again. With nobody standing between Chucky and Andy, he took the boy to the good guy factory to complete the process of stealing Andy's body. But Andy's foster sister, Kyle, realized something was amiss and followed Andy to the factory. Inside the factory, Chucky forced Andy to the ground and spoke ancient words to take possession of his body, but the ritual didn't go as planned, and Kyle quickly and desperately toppled a stack of good guy boxes over him. Chucky screamed his frustration as he pushed through the pile of boxes. Gathering his wits, he looked down the brightly lit aisle and saw Andy running in a thick, swirling mass of fog. He thought he was seeing things at first, but then he realized the fog was real and there to help him. His words hadn't worked as intended, but he somehow conjured something else, something unexpected, something he didn't quite understand. And not wanting to lose his only chance for a real body, he charged through the fog, screaming after Andy. The Unknown. Olivia's master thesis was one on urban legends and their origins. She believed they shared similarities with traditional folklore and picked one to illustrate her point. The Unknown was believed to be a mysterious evil so heinous that investigating it almost invited death. At least that was how the story went, and there were many stories. One story was of a woman in Greenville who disappeared without a trace on stage in front of a room full of witnesses. Her friend disappeared weeks later while trying to investigate what happened. The police were stumped, they had no clues or leads, and that mystery created the perfect storm for amplifying and spreading an urban legend. Instead of going back home for spring break, Olivia headed to Greenville to investigate. She drove to the second cheapest motel in town and began to set up in a small room that smelled of cigarette smoke, mold, and booze. She turned one wall into a kind of evidence board. She taped up articles and various theories on similar disappearances attributed to the unknown throughout most of the country. She made connections with red string and yellow thumbtacks. Anyone walking into the motel room would think she had lost her mind. There were many theories as to the unknown's origins. Some said it was a malevolent entity conjured long ago by an ancient cult. Others believed it was to be an alien that escaped from Area 51. Legend was it thrived in darkness and stole the voices of those it consumed so as to lure others to their doom. The first newspaper articles Olivia found reference a disappearance at a seance held in the 1800s. In the late 1950s, several college students mysteriously disappeared from a movie theatre. Witnesses saw them go inside. Some remember seeing them in their seats, but when the lights came up, they were gone. No one saw them leave. No trace of them was ever found. A projectionist claimed to have heard voices in the empty darkness of the theatre later that night, but when he turned on the lights, no one was there. Then in the 1960s, a group of teens disappeared while exploring an abandoned hospital believed to be haunted. Stories and speculation arose to explain those mystifying disappearances. Some talked about a top-secret government research program run by the Office of Strategic Services in the 1950s, Project Apple Pie. Mind control experiments using hallucinogenic drugs. Most of the records were destroyed in the 70s, but witnesses claim that experiments were performed on unsuspecting civilians in various settings and locations throughout the country, including movie theaters, hospitals, and universities. Many believed these unethical experiments opened doorways to other dimensions which allowed evil things to enter the world. Olivia wrote observations to pin to her evidence board. The unknown dwells in darkness and can mimic its victims. Was it an evil entity? An extraterrestrial? A failed government experiment? Or just a garden variety serial killer allergic to publicity? She wanted to prove the unknown was nothing more than modern-day folklore, and that investigation led here to this night, to this place, to this shabby motel room. Yet she couldn't help but notice the disappearances in Greenville included one detail the other stories didn't: the fog, and she half remembered another urban legend with a thick, unnatural fog that somehow made people disappear. Maybe, she mused, the Greenville disappearances didn't relate to the unknown, but to another darkness. For a moment, Olivia wondered what would happen if one of those urban legends encountered another one. She laughed at the idea and tempted fate by sketching a picture of what she thought the unknown might look like. She then pinned the sketch right in the middle of her evidence board, laughed nervously, and waited to be consumed by the unknown for having tried to define it. Anxiously, she stared at the windows and front door for seconds that turned into minutes and minutes that turned into hours. But nothing happened. Now it was 2 a.m. and Olivia was exhausted as she examined the articles and sipped cold coffee. So, when she heard the first whisper, she wondered if she had imagined it. Olivia. It seemed to come from the bathroom. Help. The lights in the room flickered. Who's there? Olivia stared with wide eyes at the closed door of the bathroom. Her eyes were playing tricks on her, or her friends had shown up to prank her. Ariella? Sean? Stop messing around. The lights continued to flicker as she edged closer to the bathroom. Fear spread in long waves through her, and a terrible realization bloomed within her that the unknown was behind the bathroom door, was preparing to make her pay for her hubris. Something began to whisper her name again, but then the voice rose, cracked, and distorted in sudden panic, as if the brooding creature behind the door was under attack. An unknown horror filled Olivia's heart and left nothing else. She breathed deeply as cold sweat beaded on her forehead. She placed her hand on the doorknob, the lights turned off, but she could still hear the strangely inhuman cries. Then the lights turned back on, and she could see a strange black fog seeping through the bottom of the door. Hesitantly, Olivia cracked the door open to see a bulky shape with frenzied tentacles being pulled into a thick mass of fog, vanishing slowly into the darkness like a dying shadow. The shrieking suddenly stopped. Neighbours banged on the wall to turn the TV down, and Olivia stared intently at the black abyss that yawned before her. She wasn't sure what to do. Part of her wanted to run, the other part wanted to know more. And as if she considered what to do next, dozens of voices began to call out with her with promises of the unknown and the impossible and unearthly things beyond human experience. The Lich. The Whispered One, Lord of the Rotted Tower, the Master of Secrets. Few dare speak his true name for fear that he may hear, or worse. Even as a young wizard, Vecna's command of magic was matched by none. While others spent decades committing to perfecting one school of magic, he effortlessly mastered each one of them. After his mother's execution for witchcraft, his focus became obsession as he poured the most of his studies into the darkest school of magic, necromancy, the magic of life and death. As his power grew, so did his ambition. Over the centuries, he shed his mortal shell and ascended to lichdom. His power gave him rise to a great empire ruled over Rotted Tower. His thirst for dark knowledge to fill his book of vile darkness led him to many realms and planes, but it was in his own realm where one of his servants found something, a spell perhaps torn from an ancient tomb. Written in a language he had never seen, from it he could sense an incredible dark energy. Without any document of the language, he had spent months painstakingly analysing its syntax, its phonetics, its form. He documented every stroke of every letter, scrutinising and theorising of their meanings. In a massive book hidden in his chamber, when his lieutenants came to him with problems in their domain, Vecna told them to deal with it themselves. He had more important matters to attend to. Countless nights were spent memorising the strange script, attempting to make sense of it. Only occasionally would he leave his keep to investigate rumours of people who had disappeared without a trace in the night. At these scenes, he could sense the same foreign magic that emanated from the homepage. He was convinced that whatever was killing these people was also written this strange script. He was confounded, which made him furious. The scenes, few and far between, had no pattern, no common motive, no sign of struggle, no body, and only a lingering hum of dark energy. To what end did they need these bodies? One night he had a breakthrough. A word even interpreting as dying made more sense as disappearing. Perhaps these people were not being killed at all. Perhaps they were being taken alive. He applied this substitution through his notes, and everything seemed to fall into place. He copied what he had learned to a fresh piece of parchment, written phonetically. He began to speak the words aloud and the room darkened. It filled with a creeping black fog. He felt himself displacing, going somewhere else. Vecna resisted, incanting memorized spells, holding the fog at bay. But as he gazed into the darkness, he felt that alluring energy from it. A despair, an evil he could scarcely imagine. A sick curiosity overcoming him, he dropped his concentration and let the fog take him, whatever it was, wherever it was. He had understood that the only way to harness it was to submit to it. He knew in his cold, unbeaten heart that its dark secrets would one day be his. The Dark Lord. Inconsolable grief metamorphosized into madness after the death of Dracula's beloved. He sought out the fabled Crimson Stone as a way to cheat death. but death trapped his soul inside the stone, granting him eternal life as a vampire. Vlad Tepes Dracula was now the Dark Lord. He slept by day and hunted in the eventide, seeking out the living and stealing their lifeblood. He built a castle in Romania shielded with sinister magic and turned many of those local villagers into living dead. Dracula's castle became a symbol of terror and despair. His powers seemed unassailable, and many perished trying to defeat him as he sowed endless chaos, suffering, and death. In 1476, Trevor Belmont of the Belmont clan ended Dracula's reign with the vampire killer, but the undead never stayed dead for long, and Dracula was resurrected more than once over the centuries to continue his quest for revenge. Last resurrected in 1999, Dracula raised an army of the undead. It took another descendant of the Belmont clan to defeat him, Julius Belmont. In the savage clash known as the Battle of 1999, Julius Belmont took the fight to Dracula's castle and battled the Dark Lord with the same enchanted whip his distant ancestors wielded. Most believe Dracula suffered a true death, a final death, but Dracula didn't die that night, as the vampire killer tore the flesh from his bones. A strange fog rolled across the ancient stone floor. Dracula felt the icy fingers of something or someone beckoning him. The fog engulfed him and transported him to a place where he could continue his dark vengeance against humanity. The Houndmaster. Portia May's father helped found a prosperous settlement of sailors and merchants on an uncharted island in the Caribbean. They called their port town Fortune and created a vast trading network which exposed Portia to cultures and knowledge from around the world. As a sailor and lover of stories, Portia's father read her the Arabian Nights, Shakespeare and Greek mythology, and he instructed her in sailing and celestial navigation. To be sure, he instilled within her a love for adventure that she always wanted to travel with him. Once she accompanied her father on a trip to Italy, where he traded sugar and silver for rare silks and spices. They also acquired a litter of Corso puppies, which her father said they would train as hunting dogs for Fortune's yearly hunting games. He also mentioned she could keep the strongest of the litter for her upcoming 12th birthday. She named the pups Caesar, King, Shah, Athena, and the runt of the bunch, Snug. But before she could begin their training, a violent storm pushed Nightstream off course into an area controlled by freebooters. Desperately, her father tried to steer the ship to safety, but the dreaded Mad Moloch attacked them with his ships and took the Nightstream quickly. Those who survived the initial attack were pitted against each other in vicious fights that Moloch and his crew would wager on. The brigand promised that the last man standing would be let go. When Portia's father refused to participate, the vicious of Moloch's men, his son Tarek, tortured him for hours and finally slit his throat. Keeping Portia alive to get past Fortune's outer defences, Moloch and Tarek returned to their slope and left a skeleton crew on the Nightstream. Portia would lead them into Fortune, and once inside, Moloch and his raiders would attack, pillage and burn their beloved town to the ground. Using her skills in celestial navigation, Portia led them off course through an area that many claimed to be cursed, known as the Dragon's Tooth. Some believe the area bled into the dark malignant domain of some ineffable evil where monsters roamed. Portia hoped to lead Moloch to his doom, and if she perished in the effort, so be it. As she approached the Dragon's Tooth, dark clouds accumulated and a cold black fog surrounded them. Sheets of rain fell and a fierce wind roared down on the ship, creating black mountains that crashed over the mast. Instantly, Moloch and his ship turned away from the storm and left her to perish, but Portia refused to surrender as Nightstream ploughed through the thick fog and lightning. Her heart thundered in her chest as the ship creaked and groaned and slowly capsized. The last thing she saw before the ocean swallowed her whole was the silhouette of a giant tentacle crashing down on them. Portia opened her blurry eyes to see Snug staring down at her. He licked her face and barked for her to get up. Blinking the salt water out of her eyes, she pushed her aching and bruised body from the ground, but collapsed onto the strange purple sand. She had never seen anything like it before. With difficulty, she gathered herself, stopped and turned to face the runt. Snug barked twice and began sniffing the ground, leading her to a cluster of coconuts and purple seaweed. She dried out the seaweed, cracked the coconuts, and ate on the rocks, quietly listening to creatures she had never heard before, and suddenly realized they were marooned on the island in the Dragon's Tooth. They were in a strange world, an in-between world, a world her father had once described as a living nightmare that tortured the mind and played with the heart, and as she listened to these strange new sounds, she suddenly saw Moloch everywhere. Instinctively, Portia closed her eyes and shrieked, and only stopped when Snug jumped on her lap, returning her to the moment with a crescendo of barks. Over the years, Portia survived on whatever washed ashore, as she battled the predators that stalked the island, ferocious animals, vicious humans, and savage abominations not of this world. Snug now weighed over 100 pounds and followed Portia everywhere. Together they made a daunting pair, and most of the survivors on the island kept their distance, the few who didn't live to regret if they lived at all. And just when she was about to give up on the idea of escaping, she spotted an impossible thing while searching for the beach for Snug. To her disbelief, she saw Nightstream drifting offshore in a cold black fog. She knew better than to doubt or question anything on the island. With a whistle, she entered the water but suddenly was attacked by a group of castaways. In her mind, she slaughtered Moloch 50 times and spared only those she needed to crew her ship. Together they spent days searching for Snug, but he was nowhere to be found. He was gone. Gone as if he had never been there and was only a figment of her imagination. For decades, Portia terrorized the Caribbean as she searched for Moloch. She only attacked freebooters, taking their gold and torturing them sadistically to satiate some intangible darkness living within her. A darkness like a parasite that demanded blood until it's had fill. On the occasions Portia couldn't appease its hunger, the parasite would squeeze her mind with deadly talons, crushing reason and reality until she would see Moloch's face on every crew member. She would attack and butcher everyone and anyone until one of her many trusted guard dogs barked at her for stop, and Moloch would suddenly dematerialize into wisps of black fog. Terrified, the crew knew it was only a matter of time before her madness turned against them. And so, even when they finally located Moloch, they conspired to mutiny, but they underestimated their captain. By the time Portia was through with them, there were only 5 left standing in a pool of blood and gore. They instantly threw themselves on her mercy as her dogs surrounded them, waiting for the kill command that never came. Destroying Moloch would take more hands than she possessed. Gathering her wits, she ordered the mutineers to clean up the deck and feed her dogs as she steered Nightstream towards Mad Moloch's island. Moloch himself was out at the high seas, but Portia's crew captured Tarek and locked him up in preparation for his father's return. When Moloch returned, he found the island deserted apart from a woman offering chests of gold and jewels. She claimed she wanted to join Moloch's crew and had prepared an amazing feast for him and his men. Not recognizing her, Moloch accepted the treasure and asked about Tarek. She smiled and assured him that his son would be joining them for dinner. Portia served Moloch an elaborate meal, and he drank and ate with gusto. The meal was especially good, roasted, crisp and black on the outside and pink and juicy on the inside. He wanted to know if it was wild boar or venison. Portia smiled, stood proudly and reached over the table and lifted a golden food to reveal Tariq's decapitated glazed head frozen in a scream of terror, the mouth vomiting bullions and jewels. Moloch roared his anguish like a wounded bull, and she revelled in his torment as a thick black fog rose from the floor like a black veil. But before she could strike Moloch down, something unseen jerked him backward into the darkness. At once her laughter died, lips curled with mingled panic and rage. Veins in her neck stood out in livid ridges. Talons gripped her mind and squeezed and refused to let go. He was gone, gone before she could stomp his head into a bloody pulp. Unintelligible words fumbled out of her mouth and degenerated into a guttural rasp. And just as she was about to scream, she heard the impossible, a bark she had not heard in years. She heard it again and again. Snug. He had Moloch's scent. Not trying to understand what could not be understood, she charged into the fog to finish what she had started with her long-lost friend. The Ghoul. Ken Carnegie was a gentle and kind-hearted boy who lived a simple life, studying literature at Kami University before a chance encounter turned his life upside down. He and his friend Hide frequented the cafe where one of the regulars caught his eye, Rize. She shared his passion for reading, and he spotted her even reading the same novel as him. He worked up the courage to ask her on a date. While walking her home, Rize showed her true colours, those of a ghoul known as the Binge Eater. She feasted on his flesh, nearly killing him, until a freak construction accident caused her demise, and nearly caused his as well. To save his life, doctors transplanted Rize's organs into Carnegie. He survived the surgery, but something went wrong. Food lost its flavour, and strange cravings dogged him. The life-saving surgery had made him part ghoul. Confused and afraid, he followed the instinct into an alleyway where he ran up into Toka, one of the staff members at the cafe. Shocked at his transformation, she brought him back to the cafe. He was surprised to learn that the staff were ghouls. They took him under his wing, helping him to adapt to his new reality. He learned how to fight with his newfound powers, how to deal with disturbing urges to kill and eat human flesh, and how to stay one step ahead of the CCG. His adaptation to his new life was cruelly interrupted when he was kidnapped and subjected to unprecedented physical and mental torture at the hands of a particularly cruel ghoul named Jason. His captors' exercises of control and profound violence were so diabolical that they broke Kaneki's mind, stripped him of what once made him human. His sense of self was shattered, and Rize stepped into the empty space, encouraging him to take control in his own life. And control is what he took, paying back Jason's violence in kind. He broke free and battled his captor. The torture made him numb to pain, and his shattered psyche left him no space for hesitation. He defeated Jason after a short battle and devoured him. He had been dragged into a nightmare, a tormented boy, but walked out a powerful ghoul. He considered what this meant as he pushed his way through the heavy doors, and barely noticed a black fog pool around his feet. He walked out, confident that the torture was over, but as he observed his surroundings, he realized that perhaps it had only just begun. The Animatronic. Deep within the abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, William Afton ran from the ghosts of his victims. He frantically put on his beloved Spring Bonnie costume, the disguise he wore while committing his heinous crimes, to hide from the pursuing spirits, but fate had a different plan for Afton. Something activated the spring locks within the Spring Bonnie costume. Metal clamped against metal, piercing the murderer and trapping him in his costume. As he screamed, the checkerboard floor rose up to meet him and everything went black. Thus was Springtrap born, from the death of a murderer. He awoke to a familiar sound, his body a pillar of agony. The ghosts had tormented him were gone. The walls surrounding him were decomposing, the floor beneath him falling away in mouldy patches. How much time had transpired since the spring locks tore through his body and fixed him within the costume? The urge to kill lingered within himself, the thirst long left unquenched. The sound filled his ears again. Children's laughter. Were children playing in the kitchen? Springtrap arose to his feet, adjusting to his new body, and marched towards the sounds. He picked up the speed as he moved, walking, turned to running. He rushed into the kitchen and found nothing. No children, no games, no laughter. Just a swirling mass of black fog enveloping the far wall. Springtrap examined the fog. Curiosity tightened his grip on him. As he stared into the darkness, his dissented eyes could see shapes emerge within the fog. Who were they? It didn't matter. They were his victims now. Somehow he knew the hunt could go on forever. All he had to do was step into the fog. I hope you guys have enjoyed today's video. This has taken me a very, very long time and a lot of reading. Yeah, sorry if the audio sounds a bit mixed match, but I've had to record this over so many hours, and yeah. Anyway, if you guys did and you've made it this far, I really appreciate it. Like, subscribe. It really helps the channel out. I will do the Survivors next. I might take a few days to do that though, just because I'm a little bit burnt out from reading all this lore. Yeah, I just hope you guys enjoy, and I'll speak to you all again very, very soon.